Chapter 31 The Middle Passage. Thou art of pure eyes when to behold evil, and canst not look upon iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth a man that is more righteous than he. On the lower part of a small mean boat on the Red River, Thomas sat, chains on his wrists, chains on his feet, and a weight heavier than chains lay on his heart. All had faded from his sky, moon and star, all had passed by him as the trees and banks were now pressing to return no more. Kentucky home, with wife and children and indulgent owners, St. Clair's home, with all its refinements and splendors, the golden head of Ava, with its saint-like eyes, the proud, gay, handsome, seemingly careless, yet ever kind St. Clair, hours of ease and indulgent leisure all gone, and in place thereof what remains? It is one of the bitterest apportionments of the lot of slavery that the Negro, sympathetic and assimilative after acquiring in a refined family and tastes and feelings which form the atmosphere of such a place, is not the less liable to become the bond-slave of the coarsest and most brutal, just as a chair or table, which once decorated the superb saloon, comes at last battered and defaced to the baron of some filthy tavern, or some low haunt of vulgar debauchery. The great difference is that the table and chair cannot feel, and the man can, for even a legal enactment that he shall be taken, reputed, adjudged in law, and be a chattel personnel, cannot blot out his soul with its own private little world of memories, hopes, loves, fears, and desires. Mr. Simon Legree, Tom's master, had purchased slaves at one place and another, in New Orleans to the number of 8, and driven them handcuffed in couples of 2 and 2, down to the good steamer Pirate, which lay at the levee, ready for a trip up the Red River. Having got them fairly on board, and the boat being off, he came round with the air of efficiency which ever characterized him to take a review of them. Stopping opposite to Tom, who had been attired for sail in his best broadcloth suit, when well-starched linen and shining boots, he briefly expressed himself as follows: "Stand up." Tom stood up. "Take off that stock," and as Tom, encumbered by his fetters, proceeded to do, he assisted him by pulling it with no gentle hand from his neck and putting it in his pocket. Legree now turned to Tom's trunk, which previous to this he had been ransacking, and taking from it a pair of old pantaloons and dilapidated coat, which Tom had been wont to put on about his stable work, he said, liberating Tom's hands from the handcuffs, and pointing to a recess in among the boxes, "You go there and put these on." Tom obeyed, and in a few moments returned. "Take off your boots," said Legree. Tom did so. "There," said the former, throwing him a pair of coarse stout shoes, such as were common among the slaves. "Put these on." In Tom's hurried exchange, he had not forgotten to transfer his cherished Bible to his pocket. It was well he did so, for Mr. Legree, having refitted Tom's handcuffs, proceeded deliberately to investigate the contents of his pockets. He drew out a silk handkerchief and put it into his own pocket. Several little trifles which Tom had treasured, chiefly because they had amused Ava, he looked upon with a contemptuous grunt, and tossed them over his shoulder into the river. Tom's Methodist hymn book, which in his hurry he had forgotten, he now held up and turned over. "Huh, pious to be sure. So what's your name? You belong to the church, eh?" "Yes, master," said Tom firmly. "Well, I'll soon have that out of you. I'll have none of you bawlin', prayin', singin' slaves on my place. So remember now, mind yourself," he said with a stamp and fierce glance of his gray eye directed at Tom. "I'm your church, now, you understand? You got to be as I say." Something within the silent black man answered "No," and as if repeated by an invisible voice, came the words of an old prophetic scroll as Ava had often read to him: "Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by name, thou art mine." But Simon Legree heard no voice. That voice is one he never shall hear. He only glared for a moment on the downcast face of Tom, and walked off. He took Tom's trunk, which contained a very neat and abundant wardrobe, to the forecastle, where it was soon surrounded by various hands of the boat. With much laughing at the expensive slaves who tried to be gentlemen, the articles very readily were sold to one another, and the empty trunk finally put up at auction. It was a good joke, they all thought, especially to see how Tom looked after his things, as they were going this way and that, and then the auction of a trunk that was funnier withal, and occasioned abundant witticisms. This little affair being over, Simon sauntered up again to his property. "Now, Tom, I've relieved you of any extra baggage, you see. Take mighty good care of them clothes. It'll be long enough before you get more. I go in for making slaves careful. One suit has to do for a year on my place." Simon next walked up to the place where Emmeline was sitting, chained to another woman. "Well, my dear," he said, chuckling her under the chin, "keep up your spirits." The involuntary look of horror, fright, and aversion with which the girl regarded him did not escape his eye. He frowned fiercely. "None of your shines, gal. You's got to keep a pleasant face when I speak to you, do you hear? And you old yellow Paco moonshine," he said, giving a shove to the mulatto woman to whom Emmeline was chained. "Don't you carry that sort of face. You's got to look chippier, I tell you. I say all on you," he said, retreating a pace or two back. Look at me. Look me right in the eye. Straight now," said he, stamping his foot at every pause. As by a fascination, every eye was now directed in the glaring greenish-gray of Simon. "Now," said he, doubling his great fist into something resembling a blacksmith's hammer, "do you see the fist? Heft it," he said, bringing it down on Tom's hand. "Look at these here bones. Well, I tell you, this here first has got as hard as iron knocking down slaves. I never see the slaves, yet I couldn't bring down with one crack," said he, bringing his fist down so near to the face of Tom that he winked and drew back. "I don't keep none of your cussed overseers. I does my own overseeing, and I tell you things I is seens too. You's every one on you got to toe the mark. I tell you quick, straight, the moment I speak. That's the way to keep in with me. You won't find no soft spot in me nowhere. So now mind yourselves, for I don't show no mercy." The woman involuntarily drew in their breath, and the whole gang sat with downcast, dejected faces. Meanwhile, Simon turned to his heel and marched up to the bar of a boat for a dram. "That's the way I begin with my slaves," he said to a gentleman nearby, who had stood by him during his speech. "It's my system to begin strong. Just let 'em know what to expect." "Indeed," said the stranger, looking upon him with the curiosity of a naturalist studying some out-of-the-way specimen. "Yes, indeed. And none of your gentlemen planters with lily fingers to slop round to be cheated by some old cuss of an overseer. Just feel my knuckles now. Look at my fist. Tell you, sir, the flesh on it has come just like a stone practicizing on slaves. Feel on it." The stranger applied his fingers to the implement in question and simply said, "'Tis hard enough. And I suppose," he added, "practice has made your heart just like it." "Why, yes, I may say so," said Simon with a hearty laugh. "I reckon there's as little soft in me as in any one going. Tell you, nobody comes it over me. Slaves never gets round me, neither. With scolding nor soap, that's a fact. You have a fine lot there." "Real," said Simon. "There's that Tom, they telled me he was something uncommon. I pit a little high for him, tending him for a driver and a managing chap, only get the notions out that he's larnt by being treated as slaves never ought to be. He'll do prime. The yellow woman I got took is on. I rather think she's sickly, but I shall put her through for what she's worth. She may last a year or two. I don't go for saving slaves. Use up and buy more. That's my way. Makes you less trouble. I'm quite sure it comes cheaper in the end." And Simon sipped his glass. "And how long do they generally last?" said the stranger. "Well, don't know. According as their constitution is. Stout fellers last 6 or 7 years. Trashy ones get worked up in 2 or 3. I used to, when I first began, have considerable trouble fussin' with 'em, and trying to make 'em hold out, doctoring on 'em up when they're sick, and giving on 'em clothes and blankets and what not, trying to keep 'em all sort of decent and comfortable. Lord, it wasn't no sort of use. I lost money on 'em, and it wasn't heaps of trouble. Now you see, I just put 'em straight through sick or well. When one slave's dead, I buy another, and I find it comes cheaper and easier every way. The stranger turned away and seated himself beside a gentleman who had been listening to their conversations with repressed uneasiness. "You must not take that fellow to be any specimen of southern planters," said he. "I should hope not," said a young gentleman with emphasis. "He is a mean, low, brutal fellow," said the other, "and yet your laws allow him to hold any number of human beings subject to his absolute will, without even a shadow of protection, and low as he is, you cannot say that there are not many such." "Well," said the other, "there are also many considerate and humane men among planters." "Granted," said the young man, "but in my opinion, it is you, considerate human men, that are responsible for all the brutality and outrage wrought by these wretches. Because if it were not for your sanction and influence, the whole system could not keep foothold for an hour. There were no planters such as that one," said he, pointing with his finger to Legree, who stood with his back to them. "The whole thing would go down like a millstone. It is your respectability and humanity that license and protects this brutality." "You certainly have a high opinion of my good nature," said the planter, smiling, "but I advise you not to talk quite so loud, as there are people on board the boat who might not be quite so tolerant to opinion as I am. You had better wait till I get up to my plantation. There you may abuse us all, quite at your leisure." The young gentleman colored and smiled, and the two were soon busy in a game of backgammon. Meanwhile, another conversation was going on in the lower part of the boat between Emmeline and the mulatto woman with whom she was confined. As was natural, they were exchanging with each other some particulars of her story. "Where do you belong to?" said Emily. "Well, my master was Mr. Ellis, lived on the Levee Street. Perhaps you've seen the house." "Was he good to you?" said Emily. "Mostly till he tuck sick. He's layin' sick off and on more than 6 months, and been awfully uneasy. 'Pears like he wasn't willin' to have nobody rest day or night, and got so curious there couldn't nobody suit him. 'Pears like he just grew croser every day, kept me up nights till I got fairly beat out, and couldn't keep awake no longer. And 'cause I got to sleep one night, Lors, he talked so orful to me, and he tell me that he'd sell me to just the hardest master he could find, and he'd promised me my freedom too when he died." "Had you any friends?" said Emily. "Yes, my husband. He's a blacksmith. Master generally hired him out. They took me off so quick, I didn't even have time to see him. I has got 4 children. Oh, dear me," said the woman, covering her face with her hands. It is a natural impulse in everyone, when they hear a tale of distress, to think of something to say by the way of consultation. Emily wanted to say something, but she could not think of anything to say. What was there to be said, as by a common consent they both avoided with fear and dread all mention of the horrible man who was now their master. True, there is a religious trust for even the darkest hour. The mulatto woman was a member of the Methodist Church, and had an unlightened but very sincere spirit of piety. Emmeline had been educated much more intelligently, taught to read and write, and diligently instructed in the Bible by the care of a faithful and pious mistress. Yet would it not be by the faith of the firmest Christian to find themselves abandoned apparently of God in a grass of ruthless violence? How much more must it shake the faith of Christ's poor little ones, weak in knowledge and tender in years? The boat moved on, frightened with its weight of sorrow, up the red, muddy, turbid current through the abrupt, tortuous windings of a red river, and sad eyes gazed wearily on the steep red clay banks as they glided by in dreary sameness. At last the boat stopped at a small town, and Legree with his party disembarked.